The vast, starry expanse of the galaxy stretched before them, silent and indifferent. On the edge of known space, a group of scavengers floated through a dead system, their ship the Silver Wing gliding over the debris of ancient planets. The mission was simple, or so they thought. Pick up a faint energy signature, loot the forgotten treasures of a civilization that had long passed, and disappear into the deep space where no one would ever care. But nothing was simple about the find they made 3 days ago. "Zara, what the hell is that?" V, the salvage specialist, asked, narrowing her eyes at the display. "It's huge, way too big to be anything from the system. Those readings aren't normal." Zara, the ship's pilot, leaned over the console, her 4 eyes glittering with excitement. Her fingers danced over the controls, eyes wide as she studied the readings. "It's not even on the charts," she muttered, her voice tinged with awe. "Whatever it is, it's been running on backup power for 200 years. Look at this, it's massive, V. We hit the jackpot." V's heart skipped a beat, but then a cold thought cut through his excitement. 200 years of backup power? That's not right. No one leaves a system running like that unless there's something really bad in there. Zara, oblivious to the warning bells ringing in V's mind, was already setting a course. "We're already here. We'll go in, check it out, maybe we'll get lucky. You're the one who loves treasure hunting, right?" V hesitated, watching the data flash across the screen. But greed, as it so often did, won over caution. Fine, set us down, Zara. Let's see if this place is as empty as it seems." The Silver Wing descended toward the planet, the dead world below a barren landscape of jagged rock and dark crevices. The abandoned facility, nestled deep within a range of towering cliffs, looked like nothing more than a rusted relic of a forgotten age. A dark shadow of a bygone civilization, long discarded and left to die. As the ship touched down, V, Zara, and the rest of the crew, Nim, the tech specialist, and Talk, their so-called muscle, stepped out into the arid, hostile atmosphere. Talk grumbled, his plasma rifle hanging loosely in his hands. "Another wild goose chase," he muttered, his voice carrying the irritation of someone who had seen too many failed missions. Nim, adjusting her gear, gave a distracted shrug. "The schematics say it's a detention facility, prison or research center, though it's hard to tell from the scans. But either way, it's old and its systems are primitive. We should be able to break in easy." "Primitive, huh?" V glanced back at the imposing structure. It was a far cry from the sleek, technological marvels of the Kari, their species known for their precision and advanced engineering. The prison stood in stark contrast to their design, clunky, harsh, and almost hostile. It wasn't like anything they would have built. It looked human. The thought made V uneasy, but he brushed it off. It was just an old facility, likely a relic from a long-dead race. Yeah, well, primitive means easy to loot. Inside, the facility was cold and silent, save for the low hum of the life support system still running, over 2 centuries after the facility had likely been abandoned. The walls were lined with flickering emergency lights, casting long, sinister shadows. The faint smell of old metal and dust clung to the air. "This place feels wrong," Talk muttered, his eyes scanning the corridors with suspicion. "What kind of prison keeps life support running for centuries?" "It's not just a prison," Nim murmured as she checked her data pad, the dim glow illuminating her pale face. "It's a cryogenic facility. There are hundreds of cryopods, all still active." V's eyes widened. "Cryopods? You mean they're freezing prisoners?" Nim nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she examined her screen. "That's exactly what they're doing." "Who would even do that?" Talk asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Freeze people like that? What kind of sicko would run a place like this?" "I don't know," V said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I think we've just stumbled on something we shouldn't have. Maybe it's time to go." But as they turned to leave, a loud hiss echoed through the facility. A door they hadn't noticed slid open, and what they saw inside made them stop in their tracks. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of cryopods, all arranged in neat rows, each containing a humanoid figure. Most were still, their faces frozen in stasis. But there was something different about one pod. It was new, well-maintained, and according to the console next to it, it was beginning to power up. "Shit," Zara whispered, stepping closer. "This one's waking up." The pod's occupant, a humanoid figure larger than any species they had encountered, slowly began to stir. His muscles, even in sleep, seemed to ripple with power, and his posture suggested a coiled violence that V could feel even in the stillness of the room. What is this?" Nim gasped, stepping back, her data pad falling to the floor. This isn't like the others. This is human. Human, V said, his voice a low rasp. But humans disappeared 200 years ago. All the stories said they were wiped out. Not all of them, Zara said, her eyes wide as the pod began to hum louder. Some survived, but that's not what scares me. She paused, her voice trembling. The markings on the pod, this one's dangerous. V stepped closer, his heart hammering in his chest. The screen next to the pod displayed a name. Jake Morrison, he read aloud. Sentence, indefinite detention. Crime, acts of terrorism against the Terran colonial authority. A chill ran down his spine. The pod opened with a soft hiss. Inside, a figure stirred, his massive frame unfolding with eerie calm. His face, rugged and scarred, was covered with matted brown hair. His eyes, two cold blue orbs, flashed open, catching the dim light of the room. And then, with a voice thick from sleep, he spoke. 200 years, Jake Morrison rasped, his eyes narrowing as they fell on the strangers before him. 200 years of dreaming about what I would do when I finally got out. He sat up, his movements slow but fluid, like a predator stretching after a long rest. And now, the first thing I see when I wake up, a bunch of Xenos rifling through my prison. The group froze, their blood running cold. Xenos. That was what humans called non-humans, and it was never used with kindness. V's mind raced. You're human, he stammered, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. How is that possible? Jake Morrison smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile that promised destruction. Yeah, he said, standing up with a grunt. I'm human, and I've been asleep for too damn long. Jake Morrison took a slow step toward the group, his eyes still locked on them with an intensity that made the air feel thick. His presence was commanding, as if every movement carried the weight of centuries spent in cold stasis, planning, dreaming, waiting. V, Zara, Talk, and Nim stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what was unfolding before them. A human. Not just any human, but a man who had been locked away for 200 years, kept in a prison, likely forgotten by the galaxy. But now he was awake. Jake's eyes narrowed, scanning each of them like a predator sizing up its prey. He wasn't a giant in stature, but there was something about his posture, an innate understanding of power, of dominance, that made him seem far larger than his physical form. You know what the funny thing is? Jake asked, his voice rough but steady, like the growl of a lion waking from a long nap. I wasn't even that important when they froze me, just a low-level resistance fighter with a talent for making things go boom. He smiled grimly, his teeth flashing in the dim light. They probably forgot about me 5 minutes after they stuffed me in that pod. Low-level? Talk echoed with disbelief, still trying to process the fact that the man before him was somehow a human, much less an ex-resistance fighter. You look anything but low-level. Jake's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's the thing about humans. You can take us out of the game, freeze us, bury us in the dark corners of the galaxy, but we'll always come back. Always. He stepped forward, his boots clanking against the metal floor with every movement, the sound too deliberate to ignore. You guys, you Xenos have no idea what you've just awoken. Hold on, V said, stepping forward despite the palpable fear that clung to his every word. This place, this was supposed to be abandoned. We didn't know it was a human detention center. We thought it was just some old tech site. We had no idea there was anyone still alive in here. Jake's eyes flicked toward him, and then without warning he moved. In an instant, he was standing right in front of Talk, so close that the larger alien stumbled back, his rifle held loosely in his hands. Talk blinked in surprise. What the hell? Jake's hand shot out, faster than anyone could react, grabbing Talk by the throat with a strength that seemed impossible. Talk's feet dangled for a moment before his face turned red, struggling against the pressure. Let him go, Zara shouted, her voice shaking. She raised her plasma rifle, aiming it directly at Jake. You don't want to do this. Jake's eyes met hers, cool and calculating. I don't want to do anything, he said softly, except get some damn answers. With one fluid motion, he tossed Talk aside like a ragdoll, sending him crashing to the floor. Now let me get this straight, he said, slowly turning to face them all. You were scavenging, huh? You thought you'd just stumble across some abandoned tech and make a quick profit, but instead you woke up the wrong person. You don't understand, Nim spoke up, her voice shaky but defiant. We didn't mean to wake you up, we just... You didn't mean to wake me up? Jake interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. You think that matters? You think I give a damn whether you meant to or not? All that matters is I'm awake now, and I've got 200 years of rage and confusion to work through." The room fell into a tense silence. The emergency lights flickered again, casting erratic shadows across Jake's face. He looked almost bored, as though he were simply waiting for the others to catch up. "So," Jake continued, his tone shifting, suddenly lighter. "Where are we? What year is it? What's left of humanity?" His eyes, now more alert than ever, pierced through each of them, searching for answers, searching for hope. Zara swallowed. "It's the 61st century," she said, her voice quieter now, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "The humans, they've been gone for 200 years. Most people say you disappeared. The rest think you transcended or died out." "Transcended," Jake sneered. "That's cute, so what, humanity just vanished from the galaxy?" V cleared his throat, his mind racing. "The stories say your species fought wars you couldn't win and somehow managed to conquer the galaxy anyway. But then the Terran colonial authority collapsed, and you vanished. No one really knew what happened." Jake's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I see. They never told you the truth, did they?" His voice took on a dark edge. "The truth is we didn't vanish. We were erased. We didn't lose a war. We were betrayed, abandoned by the very government that swore to protect us. And then they froze us, sent us into cold sleep, and thought that would be the end of it." "The Terran colonial authority did this?" Nim asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Why?" Jake laughed, a low, dark sound. "Because they were afraid of what humanity could do when it was united, when it wasn't bogged down by bureaucracy and corruption. They erased us, and now you Xenos are the ones who get to play in the galaxy we built." His gaze turned hard, eyes narrowing. "And I've had enough of that." The tension in the room was unbearable. The crew stood in stunned silence as Jake's words sank in. They hadn't just woken a prisoner, they had awoken a weapon, and now, it seemed, he was ready to use it. "Listen to me," Jake said, stepping closer again, his movements measured. "You're going to help me whether you like it or not." He leaned in, his voice growing colder, more threatening. "Because I'm not done, not by a long shot, and I need answers. I need to know what happened to my people, what happened to Earth." Zara looked at V, a question in her eyes. V felt a wave of guilt wash over him. What had they done? They hadn't just stumbled onto some ancient relic. They had awoken a force that might change the entire galaxy. Jake took a step back, and for a moment the tension lifted, but it was fleeting. "You want to know where you are?" Jake continued, his voice now icy calm. "You're in my prison, but not for long, and when I'm done, when I've found what I need, you Xenos won't be in charge anymore. It's time for humanity to take back what's ours." And with that, Jake Morrison, the human who had been left to rot in cold sleep, took the first step toward his vengeance. The silver wing hummed quietly in the eerie silence of space, its engines thrumming softly as it drifted just beyond the planet's orbit. Inside, the tension between the crew and Jake Morrison simmered, crackling in the air like an electric storm. No one knew how to respond to the man who had, in a matter of moments, gone from a ghost of the past to a living weapon. Zara sat at the helm, hands gripping the console, her knuckles white as she stared at the star map on the screen. She had heard stories about humans, about their bravery, their ingenuity, their unshakable will to survive. But nothing in those stories had prepared her for the force that was Jake Morrison. V, standing behind her, watched the man with a mix of awe and dread. He had seen soldiers, criminals, and politicians, but Jake was something different. He was a survivor, a force of nature, and he hadn't asked for help. He demanded it. Jake, meanwhile, had made himself comfortable in the cargo hold, sitting on a crate and examining his surroundings with a cold detachment. His fingers idly traced the edge of a control panel, studying the alien technology with a look of both curiosity and disdain. "How's that panel working for you?" V asked, trying to break the silence. "You figuring out how to get us to Earth, or do you need more help?" Jake's eyes flicked up, his gaze cold and calculating. "Earth? You really think we're going to Earth?" V blinked, taken aback. "I mean, isn't that where you're from?" A slight smile tugged at Jake's lips. "I'm not going to Earth, not yet. I'm going to find out where the humans are now, what happened to us, to Earth." Nim stepped forward, her brow furrowed in thought. "Jake, what do you mean? You're saying Earth doesn't exist anymore? What happened?" Jake's expression grew darker. "It was wiped out, not by any war, but by systematic eradication. The colonial authority made sure we were erased, our history buried. No one remembers what happened to Earth. No one even remembers us." His fists clenched at his sides. "That's why I'm awake, to remind them, to remind you." Nim's face softened, her curiosity piqued despite the underlying fear. How can we help you? Jake stood, his posture straightening as he approached the crew. You're going to take me to the core systems, to the Galactic Council. I want to know what they've done to my people, what they've done to Earth. But first, you're going to help me find the others. The others? V asked, confused. Jake's blue eyes bore into him with a chilling intensity. The ones they thought they buried, the ones they thought were gone forever. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. There are survivors, I know there are. The silver wing jumped into hyperspace, its trajectory now set for the heart of the galaxy. The crew, though still shaken by the encounter with Jake, had no choice but to comply. They had made their bed when they stumbled upon the facility. Now they were at the mercy of the human they had woken. As the stars stretched into lines, the hum of the ship's engines filled the silence. The crew gathered in the mess hall, staring at their food as if they were all trying to avoid looking at one another. The air between them was thick with uncertainty. So this is it, Talk muttered, pushing his plate aside. We're really doing this, huh? Going to some godforsaken part of the galaxy to track down humans that have been in hiding for centuries. Nim didn't look up from her data pad. We don't have a choice, Talk. We woke him up. We're in this now. I don't know if I believe all this, Talk grumbled. Humans, surviving 200 years in the shadows. If they're so damn resourceful, why haven't we heard anything from them? Why hasn't one of them sent a message or made a move? Zara leaned back in her seat, her eyes flicking toward the door where Jake stood watching them, as though he knew exactly what they were saying. Because they've been waiting, she said quietly. Waiting for someone like him, someone who remembers. Jake entered the mess hall without a sound, his boots heavy on the metal floor. Your species doesn't understand, he said, his voice low but filled with purpose. We were never meant to be erased. We've always been survivors. You think you can forget us, but you can't. And now, he paused, his gaze hardening. Now I'm going to make them remember. The journey through hyperspace took days, but it felt like months. As the crew sat in the control room, their ship cutting through the endless void, Jake's presence loomed like a shadow. He was a ghost, but not the kind that haunted. No, this one was alive, and his thirst for vengeance was insatiable. As they approached the core systems, the star maps showed more than just the typical trade routes. The areas Jake had marked were dark, hidden, and full of anomalies. V watched as Jake pored over the data, his fingers flying across the ship's controls with terrifying expertise. Tell me about the Galactic Council, Jake asked, his voice flat. Tell me what I'm walking into. The Galactic Council is a coalition, V explained, of over a dozen species who maintain order and trade throughout known space. The Zenthari provide military support, the Altarians handle administration, and the rest. Well, they're just here to keep things running smoothly. No one questions the council. Except for you humans, Jake muttered, more to himself than anyone else. You fought them, didn't you? You were the thorn in their side. That's why they had to take you out. That's why they left us in cold sleep. They didn't just take you out, Nim said softly. They erased you, they made you disappear. Jake's eyes locked on hers. Exactly, and now I'm going to make them regret it. The tension between Jake and the crew had reached its boiling point. They were on the edge of a precipice, with no idea what awaited them in the core systems. Would they find more survivors? Would the council try to stop them? As the ship entered a new sector, Jake's expression hardened. Prepare yourselves, he said, his voice ice-cold. This is where the ghosts of the past come to haunt the galaxy. The silver wing dropped out of hyperspace, and the crew stared at the screen. They had arrived at the core systems, but what they found was far from what they expected. A fleet of ships, all human-made, emerging from the shadows of space. There were no markings, no insignias, just the unmistakable silhouette of humanity's once mighty armada. And Jake smiled. Welcome home, he said quietly. The human fleet emerging from the darkness of the galaxy's core was an unexpected sight for the crew of the Silver Wing. The ships, unlike anything V or his team had ever seen, were a mix of old, battle-worn vessels and newer, sleek warships that seemed to pulse with life. It was as if humanity had been in hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now that moment had come. V's heart hammered in his chest as the ships drew closer, their dark silhouettes against the starry backdrop like the ghosts of a lost empire, long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. The ships didn't look like pirates nor rebels. They looked organized, precise, as though they were a unified force, one that had been waiting to return. "Jake," Zara said, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" Jake Morrison, standing at the helm, didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the ships, scanning the fleet with an unsettling calm. His fingers rested lightly on the control panel, as though he were merely assessing the situation. He turned slowly, a dark smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "This," he said, his voice colder than V had ever heard, "is humanity's return." "Return?" Nim echoed, a question lacing her voice. "Jake, these ships, they're not supposed to exist. If humanity was erased, how is this possible?" Jake looked back at her, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of someone who knew exactly what was coming next. "The Council thought they could bury us," he said softly. "They thought they could erase every last trace of humanity from the galaxy, but we don't die, we adapt, and we remember." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had thought they were simply helping Jake find answers. Now, it was clear they were part of something much bigger than they had ever anticipated. The fleet moved swiftly, the ships navigating with military precision, their engines humming softly through the vastness of space. The Silver Wing was dwarfed in comparison, its hull a tiny speck against the blackened backdrop of the larger ships. As they approached, a message crackled through the comms, sharp and direct. "Commander Morrison," the voice said, low and respectful. "Ghost Fleet is in position. We await your orders." Jake straightened, the weight of command settling over him like an old, familiar coat. His voice was steady as he spoke into the comms. "Begin the approach. We've got unfinished business." V watched him, the man who had been a myth, a ghost from the past, now becoming something far more real and terrifying. The way Jake carried himself now was different from before. Gone was the confusion of awakening, replaced by the determination of someone with a mission. The mission was clear: reclaim what had been taken and make those who had forgotten pay. Hours passed in tense silence as the Silver Wing moved deeper into the heart of the fleet. The ships surrounding them were silent, their presence like an unspoken promise. The closer they got, the more V began to understand. This was not just a group of survivors, this was an army. "Where are we going?" Zara asked, breaking the silence. Jake's gaze flicked over to her, his eyes hard but oddly sympathetic. "To the Galactic Council," he said, "to remind them why they should never have forgotten humanity. They may have erased us from history, but we're going to write our own chapter." As they neared the Council's headquarters, a massive station orbiting a gas giant, V felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just an invasion. This was the beginning of a war, one that would alter the balance of power across the galaxy. The Galactic Council was composed of species from across known space, each one with its own military might, political influence, and deep-seated rivalries. The Zenthari, the Altarians, the Valdari, they all had their place within the Council, but none of them had ever faced humanity. V couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something much larger than they could comprehend. They had awoken Jake Morrison from his cold sleep, and now the galaxy was about to see what that meant. The Silver Wing docked with the Galactic Council station, the hum of its engines dying as they were ushered into the belly of the massive, shining structure. The station was a marvel of alien engineering, its smooth, metallic surface gleaming under the station's artificial lights. The doors opened to reveal a team of council representatives, Zenthari in their intricate armor, Altarians with their sleek, silver robes, and a host of other species, all watching with varying degrees of curiosity and caution. Jake stepped forward first, his gaze sweeping over the council members, each one studying him as though he were a relic of the past. His expression was calm, but his presence was magnetic. Everyone in the room knew instinctively that this man was no ordinary prisoner. "Commander Morrison," a tall Zenthari representative said, his voice formal but tinged with something else, fear perhaps. "We did not expect you to return. The history books say your species was lost." Jake's lips twitched into a smile. "The history books are wrong. I'm not lost. I was waiting." He looked around the room at the assembled council members, his eyes cold. "And now I've come to remind you of what you forgot." "Humanity," the Altarian representative said slowly, her voice trembling ever so slightly, "was eradicated for the good of the galaxy. Your species was deemed too dangerous to remain. The council agreed that your presence was no longer necessary." Jake's gaze sharpened. "Necessary?" he repeated, his voice low and deadly. "Who decided that? The same ones who decided to freeze my people and erase our existence. You were so afraid of humanity's strength you thought you could destroy it, but you didn't, and now you're going to pay." A chill spread across the room as the weight of his words settled over the representatives. They had underestimated the humans, assuming they were just a fleeting threat, something that could be erased, like a bad memory. But Jake Morrison wasn't a bad memory. He was the beginning of something they couldn't control. "Prepare yourselves," Jake said, turning to the council. "This is just the beginning. You thought you could get rid of humanity. Now we're here to take back what's ours." With a snap of his fingers, the communication system buzzed to life. The Silver Wings fleet, once hidden in the darkness of the galaxy, now emerged in full force. A wave of ships, massive and daunting, arrived at the station, their engines roaring as they flanked the Silver Wing on all sides. "You," Jake said, his voice resonating with authority, "you are about to see why humanity was feared." The doors to the council chamber slid open. It was time to face the consequences of their past decisions. Jake was no longer just the last human waking from a long sleep. He was a leader, a commander ready to bring the galaxy to its knees. The hum of the Silver Wing's engines was drowned out by the deafening roar of the fleet as it surrounded the Galactic Council's station. The fleet was no longer a quiet threat. It was a declaration. Jake Morrison had brought humanity back into the fold of the galaxy, but not as forgotten relics. No, this was their return as conquerors. The Council had forgotten humanity's resilience, and now they would learn the hard way. Jake stood in the center of the council chamber, his eyes locked on the representatives who had gathered around the grand, circular table. He could feel their fear, the way they shifted uneasily in their seats, their hands nervously touching their consoles as they tried to keep their composure. But there was no hiding the truth. Humanity was no longer a footnote in the galaxy's history. They were a force, and the Council was about to learn what it meant to underestimate them. "You were wrong," Jake said, his voice calm but sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "You thought you could eliminate us. You thought that by freezing us, by erasing our history, you could avoid the consequences. But humanity doesn't die. We adapt, we survive, and we come back stronger than ever." A Zenthari representative, one of the highest-ranking members of the Council, stood up, his towering figure casting a long shadow in the dimly lit chamber. "Jake Morrison, you have no right to stand here and accuse us. Humanity was a threat. We did what had to be done to protect the galaxy from your kind." Jake's eyes flared with anger, but he kept his voice steady. "Protect the galaxy from us? You've always feared humanity's strength. You thought by eliminating us you'd be safe, but you were wrong. You see, the thing about humanity is that we never forget, and we never forgive. The galaxy can try to erase us, but we'll always come back, and we will make you pay." The council chamber was silent as Jake's words echoed in the air. The Zenthari representative took a step back, seemingly taken aback by Jake's intensity. The Altarians shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. They knew Jake was right. They had underestimated humanity, and now they had to face the consequences. Outside, the Silver Wing and the rest of the human fleet were poised for action. The ships were in perfect formation, their engines humming with deadly anticipation. The fleet had been waiting for this moment for 2 centuries, and now they were ready to take back what was theirs. V stood at the observation window, watching as the fleet loomed in space, each ship a symbol of humanity's strength and determination. "This is insane," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "We're actually doing this." Zara stood next to him, her eyes fixed on the fleet. "I didn't think it would come to this. I thought we were just uncovering some old technology, not awakening a whole damn war." V turned to her, his face grim. "We didn't wake him up. We opened Pandora's box, and now we have to deal with the fallout." Zara nodded, her expression hardening. "We've got no choice now. Jake made it clear this is bigger than all of us." Back in the council chamber, Jake's gaze never wavered. "You've had your chance," he said. "You had the power to make things right, but instead you chose to bury humanity. Now we're here to take back what's ours." The Altarian representative, her face pale, spoke up hesitantly. "Jake, please, we didn't erase humanity out of malice. It was for the greater good. The Council was trying to preserve peace. We were trying to protect the galaxy from chaos." Jake's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed like time itself slowed. "Peace," he repeated, his voice cold as ice. "You think you're keeping peace by erasing entire species? You think you can control the galaxy by keeping it under your thumb? You were afraid of what we could do, so you locked us away. but humanity's legacy can't be locked in a cage forever. The Zenthari representative slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising with anger. Enough of this. Humanity was a plague upon the galaxy. We did what was necessary to preserve order. You are no longer a part of this galaxy. You have no claim here. Jake's smile was chilling. You want to know what's funny? The only thing that's been a plague to this galaxy is the Council itself. You've all been lying, manipulating, and oppressing everyone around you to maintain your power. And you've forgotten the one thing that made humanity dangerous in the first place. And what's that? The Zenthari demanded, his eyes narrowing. Humanity, will to fight, Jake said simply. We never stop, we never give up. And now you're about to find out what happens when we finally get our hands on the wheel again. With a swift motion, Jake turned toward the door. We've waited long enough. The galaxy is going to remember humanity's name. Outside, the battle began. The human fleet descended upon the Council station, their ships moving with deadly precision. The Zenthari and the Altarians scrambled to respond, their forces barely able to react in time. The human warships tore through the defenses with ease, their weapons opening fire in coordinated bursts, overwhelming the station's defenses in minutes. Zara and V watched as explosions lit up the dark expanse of space, the shockwaves rippling through the station's hull. The fleet was unstoppable. The humans had been planning this for centuries, and now they were reclaiming what had been taken from them. This is it, Zara said, her voice steady but filled with awe. The war has started. V turned to her, his face tense. We're in it now, there's no going back. Inside the Council station, chaos erupted. The Council members scrambled to evacuate, but it was clear that they had underestimated the human fleet's power. Jake stood in the center of the chamber, watching as the station trembled from the impacts outside. He turned to the Zenthari representative, his voice dripping with disdain. You thought you could erase us, Jake said, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. But now you'll see what happens when humanity decides it's had enough. The Zenthari growled, his fists clenched. You'll never win, the Council is too powerful. Jake chuckled darkly. The Council is nothing but a paper tiger, and I'm about to tear it to pieces. The battle raged on, the human fleet pushing forward, unstoppable in its resolve. The Galactic Council, once a symbol of unity and order, was now crumbling beneath the weight of humanity's vengeance. Jake had awakened, and with him, a new era had begun, one that would reshape the galaxy forever. As the station's defenses faltered and the last of the Council's forces retreated, Jake stood at the helm of his fleet, watching as the chaos unfolded. He had done it. Humanity had returned. And now, the galaxy would know what it meant to face a species that never stopped fighting. The human fleet moved through hyperspace like a dark wave crashing toward the shore. On board the Silver Wing, the crew sat in tense silence. Their thoughts echoed in the confines of the ship, like whispers carried through the vacuum of space. Jake Morrison had led them into this storm, into a war they had never planned for. The galaxy was already reacting to Jake's message. Across every system, from the icy reaches of the Zenthari Empire to the lush worlds of the Altarians, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity had returned. They were no longer the forgotten species. They were a force, a threat, and the galaxy would not ignore them. But as the fleet neared the heart of Council space, an uncomfortable truth began to settle over the crew. They had opened a door that could never be closed again. Inside the command room, Jake stood before the crew, his back to the window. The stars beyond the ship stretched into lines, the dark expanse of hyperspace surrounding them. His face was illuminated by the faint glow of the consoles, his features hard, determined. "Have you been in contact with the rest of the fleet?" V asked, his voice quieter than usual. Jake turned, his expression unreadable. "They're on their way. We have a full assault lined up on the Council's capital. But first, we need to secure the last piece of this puzzle." Zara frowned. "The capital, you're going for the heart of the Council. Are you insane?" Jake's eyes were piercing, unwavering. "The Council must fall. You heard their lies, you saw their arrogance. It's time to show them that humanity is not something they can bury. We are the storm they never saw coming." The tension within the crew was palpable. Nim paced the small space between the crew seats, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her datapad. "I thought we were just going to expose them," she muttered. "But now we're about to launch an all-out assault on the heart of the galaxy's government. I didn't sign up for this." "You signed up the moment you woke Jake up," Talk said bitterly, glancing at her. Now we have to deal with the fallout. Whether we like it or not, this is our reality now. Enough, Jake interrupted, his voice hard but calm. We do this because we don't have a choice. We've already made our move. This is the only way to ensure humanity's place in the galaxy. As the Silver Wing and the rest of the human fleet neared the Council capital, a massive station orbited the bright, golden heart of a nearby star. It was the seat of power for every species in the galaxy, the place where decisions were made, where policies were forged, where the fate of entire civilizations had been decided for centuries. But now that power was being challenged. We're going in, Jake said, his voice resolute. This isn't just about vengeance anymore. This is about reclaiming what was stolen from us, our history, our future. Zara's grip tightened on the console. We can still turn back, we don't have to do this. Jake's eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment there was something almost regretful in his gaze. I wish we could, but we're past that point now. The battle was ferocious from the moment they dropped out of hyperspace. The Council's defenses were formidable, but they were no match for the sheer power and precision of the human fleet. Jake had orchestrated this attack with brutal efficiency, launching wave after wave of human warships, cutting through the enemy's defenses like a hot knife through butter. But it wasn't just the weapons or the tactics that made humanity so dangerous. It was their resolve. The Council might have been a coalition of many species, each with their own strengths, but they lacked the singular focus that humanity had. And it was that focus, that relentless drive to survive, that would win the day. Jake stood at the helm of the Silver Wing, watching as the battle unfolded. His gaze was cold, unflinching, as explosions rocked the station around them. We've come too far to stop now, he muttered under his breath. As the Silver Wing neared the Council's central command station, a fleet of heavily armed Zenthari ships emerged from the shadows, their weapons charging as they prepared for the final stand. Brace yourselves, Jake ordered. This is it. We take them out or we don't leave this system. The crew exchanged tense looks as the massive battle ensued. The human fleet collided with the Zenthari forces in a dazzling display of firepower and strategy, the air vibrating with the impact of explosions. The Silver Wing weaved through the chaos, dodging enemy fire as it closed in on the station. Inside the Council's command station, the final line of defense was ready. The Council representatives had retreated to the heart of the station, a heavily fortified bunker where they had planned to make their last stand. We need to break through, Jake said, his voice a mixture of anger and resolve. The Council is running scared. They'll do anything to keep control. Zara nodded, her expression grim. We'll take the path to the heart of the station. You and Talk clear the way, and Nim and I will handle the comms. The Silver Wing docked inside the station's docking bay, and the team boarded, weapons in hand. They moved through the corridors, every step echoing through the empty halls. The station was eerily quiet, as though the Council knew what was coming. Talk was the first to break the silence. This is too easy, he muttered, his voice low. Where is everyone? They're preparing for the final push, Jake replied, his voice cold. But it's too late, they've already lost. As they reached the central chamber, the doors to the Council's inner sanctum opened with a hiss. Inside, the remaining members of the Council were waiting, their faces grim. The final confrontation was inevitable. Jake stepped into the room, his gaze locking with each Council member in turn. You thought you could erase humanity, he said, his voice hard. But we're not gone, we're not going anywhere, and now you'll pay the price for your arrogance. One of the Council members, the Zenthari leader, stood to face Jake, his body tense with defiance. You are no longer welcome here, Jake Morrison. Your species was a plague upon the galaxy, and now you will be eradicated once and for all. Jake's eyes flashed with fury. You don't get it. This isn't about me. It's about humanity's right to exist, and I will make sure the galaxy remembers why we were feared. The final battle was swift. The Council, though well-armed, could not match the fury of a species that had been driven to the brink of extinction and had returned with a vengeance. The fight was brutal, but in the end, Jake and his crew emerged victorious. With the Council members subdued, Jake took a moment to catch his breath, his chest rising and falling with exertion. He turned to V, Zara, and Nim, his expression unreadable. We've won, Jake said quietly, but the war isn't over, not yet. V stared at him, his eyes hard. What do you mean? Jake smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of calculation. We've taken the capital, but now we need to ensure the galaxy understands that humanity is not something to be ignored. We're here to stay, and we'll do whatever it takes to make sure everyone knows that. As the Silver Wing left the shattered remains of the Council station, the crew stood together, looking out at the galaxy they had just changed. The battle was over, but the true war was just beginning. Humanity had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again.